Hello, my name is Sergio Marrero, and this is Rebel One Live. Today we have Eric Sonnier. He's director of the University of Virgin Islands Research and Technology Park, and an accelerator called Accelerate VI, Accelerate Virgin Islands. He is a graduate of Harvard Business School, also a graduate of the University of Texas, Austin, serial entrepreneur, and we're going to talk about that story. But he's an ecosystem innovator, and we're glad to have him today. So thanks for joining us, Eric.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I know for the audience, just to give them a sense of Eric and I go way back, back to his days at Deloitte, and then also at Harvard Business School, and part of our impact focus at Rebel One is not only diversity in terms of underrepresented founders, women, Black, Latino, but also geographic. We need to give people capital outside of just the New York, San Francisco, and Boston ecosystem. So we're excited to talk about that today and the work he's doing. So to dive right in, Eric, can you share a little bit more about the RT Park and Accelerate VI?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I get started, just wanted to thank you for the work that you're doing, Sergio. I know we go way back, and it's been incredible to see the journey of where we were back then. Almost 15 years ago, I guess, since we first met, and the work that you're doing now, especially when it comes to underrepresented founders and being able to provide more access to capital for entrepreneurs. So just quickly, my current position, as you mentioned, Director of Business Attraction and Entrepreneurship at the UVI Research and Technology Park. For people that don't know, the U.S. Virgin Islands is a part of the U.S. Most people have heard about the British Virgin Islands, but there are three main islands that make up the U.S. Virgin Islands. That is St. Croix, St. Thomas, and St. John. Population is roughly 100,000 people. But in terms of, laws, taxes, currency, all of it is U.S. based, right? So same protections that you would have in any state or territory for the U.S. we have here in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Not random that I ended up here. My wife is from one of those three islands. She's born and raised on the island of St. Croix. And it was just a great opportunity for us to come back. And luckily, UVI has this research and technology park, and I was able to convince them to hire me and allow me to leverage my background in not only founding companies, but I've gone through a few accelerator companies, which we can talk about a little later in the program, and just sort of use all of that information to meld this accelerator program that we've launched here in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So just to back up a little bit, the Research and Technology Park was founded in 2002 by the government of the U.S. Virgin Islands. And the idea was to really help diversify the economy. So it's an economic development organization, but it's focused on tech and knowledge-based businesses. For obvious reasons, the territory being in the Caribbean, a lot of the revenue into the territory is tourism dependent. And, even before COVID-19 hit, people understood the need to try to diversify the economy. And they see that after hurricanes as well. So the idea launched in 2002. And since then, the Research and Technology Park, or RT Park, like we like to call it, has done a great job of attracting businesses, just like any other economic development organization would, with a focus on tech and knowledge-based businesses. So we have about 50 companies that have moved from random places in the U.S., mainland U.S., to the U.S. Virgin Islands, and they make commitments to the Research and Technology Park, but then they also make commitments to the university. And because of that, they receive some tax incentives to move here. One thing that I wanted to do when I got in this position was provide more opportunities for local residents, so people that grew up in the territory, to be able to grow and start technology companies. So as there are anywhere in the world, there are tinkerers, there are people that are builders and doers that have great ideas. but a lot of times that's not enough. And I've seen that in the different tech hubs that I've lived in, Boston, the Bay Area, and then Austin, Texas, is that a lot of times just having the idea isn't good enough. That's a great place to start, and you need someone to kind of put the tools around you and show you how the industry works in order to take your idea to a business, or from starting a business to take it to the next level. And so that was one of the things that I wanted to focus on here. And so last year we launched Accelerate VI, which is the first tech-based accelerator program in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And we had one cohort go through the program last year. We can talk about some of that in a bit, but we've recently launched our second cohort, which we've had to do virtually for the reason that most people are working from home right now.
Got it. Thank you for that. And to dive in, I mean, there's so much there, so many different directions to go. But if you can share a little bit about how you started, if we go back to if we go back specifically to, let's say, Deloitte, where you were working consulting, and then how did you end up starting an accelerator on the U.S. Virgin Islands?
Yeah, I always talk about that Steve Jobs commencement speech, that Stanford commencement speech, where he talks about, just being able to look back and connect the dots, not really knowing where you're going, but once you're there, being able to connect those dots and see how you got to where you were. A lot of it is just very random and lucky, to be honest. Graduated in 2008, so the last economic downturn, right? And saw a lot of my friends go off to work in places that, they didn't have a job 3 months later, or the entire company didn't exist 3 months later. One of those friends from University of Texas, he actually went and worked on Wall Street, and he went to work at Lehman Brothers, and we all know what happened there. So he found himself in San Francisco a couple of months later, and was working at a very small mobile advertising startup. And this was, 2009, 2010, 2011, where he was at this mobile advertising startup. The industry was fairly new at that time. The CEO of that company he'd written an algorithm where he was able to track the call to action, not just the click. And therefore he was able to charge a little bit more for that. When after I did about 3.5 years of consulting, I got tired of that lifestyle, wanted to travel less, thought I was interested in entrepreneurship because it was, a sexy term at the time, but wasn't really sure. So I reached out to this friend that was out in San Francisco. He told me all about their startup. They were growing, they were profitable, so no VC funding. And I somehow convinced the CEO to come and let me work for them, knowing that I was applying to business school and hopefully going in the fall. But he let me do it. I worked really hard at that company, not quite a whole year, because like I said, I was applying to business school, but it got my feet wet. It helped me understand what it was really like to work at a startup that had, less than 10 people. And keep in mind, I'd left Deloitte in their strategy and operations consulting practice, and we're talking about thousands and thousands of people spread out across the country, if not the world. So going from that to a less than 10 person startup was just a culture shock. And I also realized how much I actually learned while working in consulting, right? That I was able to apply to an early stage business that lacked a little bit of structure. It was kind of everybody just doing what they could to keep the wheels on. But through that process, I understood that I wanted to do something entrepreneurial. And when I got into Harvard Business School, as you know, I focused solely on the resources that business school had that I could leverage to I didn't know that I was going to be a founder, but I at least wanted to go and work for another startup. And throughout that first year, ended up partnering with one of our classmates and founded a company that was called Local Lift at the time. And really, it was a platform to help small and medium-sized businesses raise capital for projects. Right, so it would be extremely useful today because you're essentially prepaying for something. I've seen a lot of articles about people who, want to prepay for haircuts to keep that small business, the barbershop, open throughout this pandemic. And that was essentially our business model. We, as you know about that, we didn't raise enough money in order to scale. And that's the type of company that was hyper local. You needed to raise several rounds of funding in order to even get to a point where you could try to scale it. And we just weren't successful at that. So we ended up shutting that down, and I went through Y Combinator with that company. And so we've learned a ton, realized that, you may think you're smart, but until you peel the onion back and really understand what it takes to grow and start a company, I'm always surprised by what our CEO, I wasn't the CEO of that startup, but I remember calling him one day and saying, I have no clue how you pulled off the things that you pulled off while we were working at this startup, because the next startup I was the CEO. And so I then had to take on some of the work that he was doing in our first startup. But just through that whole process, learned a ton from Y Combinator that I was able to leverage in the next startup, and also, trying to leverage as I'm doing my own accelerator program here in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So just quickly, the second startup, I actually moved from San Francisco to Texas, to Austin, because I'm from Texas and I wanted to be closer to family, and kind of sworn off startups for a while. I was like, hey, there's no way I'm jumping back into that. I'd have to be crazy. And then within a couple of months, I'm back at it. So I guess I got bit by the bug. But this second startup has been much more successful. It is in a legal tech space, really dealing with a lot of compliance and reg tech, and at a time when reg tech was pretty new, and ran that company for about 3.5 years. When I started that company, was not married and had no kids, and fast forward 3.5 years later, married and had two beautiful daughters. And so life had changed a little bit, and that was when we made the decision that we wanted to move to the U.S. Virgin Islands. And fast forward to me now running the accelerator program and talking to you, Sergio.
No, thank you for sharing that, and definitely familiar with the bug. You go through the grind, and you're like, I'm never doing that again, and then you're like, well, there's this thing, and if I don't build it, no one's gonna build it, so I should do that. So yeah, I completely understand. And can you talk a little bit about the benefits, drawbacks, the decision that you made to actually co-found in Austin versus co-founding in a San Francisco or New York?
Yeah, so one benefit that I had in both places is that I went through an accelerator program. Again, I talked about Y Combinator in the Bay Area. In Austin, we got accepted and went through the Capital Factory Accelerator program, which, if anybody's been to South by Southwest, Capital Factory is really sort of that center of gravity for the entrepreneur ecosystem in Austin. I would say in the earliest stages, outside of there just being a larger concentration of people that are in the startup space or in the industry in the Bay Area, in the early stages, there are angels in Austin. There's accelerator programs, incubator programs. There's enough of a startup ecosystem that you could find your way, right? Comparing it to some of the other non-coast places, right? Not the San Franciscos, not the New Yorks or the Bostons. I would say Austin is, right up there in terms of early stage companies that are being founded. One of the topics that continually came up when living in Austin and being in the startup ecosystem is just the amount of capital for later stage companies. Obviously, there's no place like the Valley, but that was one of the main sticking points in Austin, is that people would try to figure out how do we get more capital for later stage companies. In the 3.5 years or so that I was there, plus fast forward the time that since I've left, the amount of funding in Austin has grown tremendously, right? You're seeing more funds pop up. Not only are you seeing more funds pop up, but you're seeing funds raised or VCs raise larger funds, right, to do to fill some of the void that you're seeing. You're also, even during my time in Austin, seen a big influx of people moving from California, whether that's the Bay Area or even down in LA, San Diego, moving to Austin for various reasons. But with that comes a lot of that energy. The capital is following. There's a lot of founders who have had successful exits that have moved to Austin and are, you know, serving as that role as angel investors or early stage investors. So I would say that while there's no place like San Francisco, like the Bay Area, if you had to start a company and you weren't there, Austin is not a bad place to do it, and it's only getting better.
Great. Yeah, it's. I remember the first time I went to South by Southwest, and I was blown away by the energy of, you know, the world coming to Austin to shake things up, and love the culture there. The Keep Austin Weird culture. So it's a
awesome. Yeah, absolutely.
Great place. So and then I know you said your wife is from the Virgin Islands, so you didn't pick it randomly. But how did the vision present itself for Accelerate VI?
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, the research and technology part has always done a great job of attracting businesses to the territory. So there's already this small cluster. And again, the population of the U.S. Virgin Islands is a little bit north of 100,000, right? And so a network of 50 or so tech companies, you know, while it may not mean anything in a major city in the U.S., it means something to the territory. So there's already this small cluster of companies that, you know, we're leaning on to try to help diversify the economy, for them to build their companies here, for them to hire more people here, et cetera. But as you know, that's just one way to skin the cat, right? The other way that you create jobs and create an entrepreneurial ecosystem is that you just give more people that are already here trying to build more at-bats, right? So that was the goal of Accelerate VI, is to find, like, yeah, it's great that we have successful entrepreneurs moving here, but I'm sure that there are successful entrepreneurs that are here that just haven't been discovered yet. And so what would happen if we built a program where we're actively seeking out those entrepreneurs and building a program around them, so that not only they could be successful, but then you have future generations of Virgin Islanders here that see that, oh, I don't necessarily have to leave the territory in order to work on an idea, a startup idea. And that's kind of what was happening, where you know, brain drain is, you know, not something that is only used here in the territory. It happens in a lot of places in the U.S. where your youngest and brightest talented people go off to college and not return, right? And that's been happening in the U.S. Virgin Islands a lot. There's actually a lot of, since starting this program, there's a lot of Virgin Islanders that I've come across that are working at IBM and Google and Facebook and LinkedIn. So the talent is there. They just, I don't think anybody's seen the opportunity to also do those types of things at home or where they're from. And so that was really the idea behind it, is that I bet if you gave us an opportunity, we could identify, you know, 7 or 8 companies on an annual basis that, you know, I would put up against, you know, startups that are being founded in other places, right? And instead of them leaving to go and start a company in, you know, Miami or Atlanta, I mentioned those because they're relatively close. DC, there's a large Virgin Islands population in DC as well. But instead of them leaving the territory to go and work on a startup or enter an accelerator program, what would happen if we build one right here at home? And that was the sort of genesis behind it. And if we could not only find the local entrepreneurs, have them go through the program, but then also connect them with the 50 or so tech companies that we've already attracted to the territory, what could happen, right? And if you think about these successful entrepreneurs that are here, that have already built profitable, well-run businesses, right? Not only could they mentor the younger entrepreneurs, first-time entrepreneurs, but then when you think about people that are writing angel checks, they fit the demographic, right? So you had one piece of the pie without the other. And so what happens if we put those pieces together? Can we help spur, and create an entrepreneur ecosystem here in the territory? And that's the goal that we set out to do. And one thing I'll add is that there, outside of tourism and government related jobs, there hasn't been a big focus or push. And so we wanted to be that. We wanted to do that. And a lot of the territory, like when you think about the Caribbean, it is extremely beautiful. But there's a large percentage of the population that lives low income, right? So, but they're tinkerers, they're working on things. And the internet to me, is the great equalizer, right? The internet doesn't discriminate based on race or gender. It doesn't discriminate based on location, right? So if you have a computer and you have an idea, especially in today's age, day and age, where it's much cheaper to start a company, right? Why not do it here in the territory? And this is before COVID-19, right? Where now people are scrambling to figure out, where they can work from home, right? And the work from home is really the work from anywhere. And so why not work in a place where you can, hammer out what you need to do, 8-10 hours a day, and then, take a walk on the beach just to clear your head. So.
Absolutely. And can you talk about the resources that you provide? Do you give them funding, like details on the program?
Yeah, absolutely. So our program mirrors a lot of the programs that people hear about when they hear accelerators. So we provide access to capital, mentorship, really entrepreneurship training, if you will. So educational content that is related to starting a company. And that comes in many forms. So a lot of it are workshops, right? So just today we had a product management workshop that was run by someone who works at one of the top tech companies in the world and is a product manager, right? And we have workshops on creating a pitch deck or go-to-market strategy, how to come up with your total addressable market. So all of the sort of educational content that you would get from any other accelerator, we're doing that. In addition to that, we're opening a co-working space actually within the next 30 days because of social distancing. We'll slowly roll that out, but it's a space that we will host the accelerator. We also give the accelerator companies free office space in the co-working space. In addition to that, we try to be very strategic about how we pair the companies with the mentors. So not only do we have mentors that are from the Virgin Islands that have gone off to work into in large tech companies, I've just leveraged my network, you being an example of that. But also I have still friends and founders and investors that I've worked with over the course of my career that have all volunteered to help out and give their time. Because not all of our companies are, at the same stage, because we're dealing with a smaller pool of founders. We're kind of dealing with some people that are pre-revenue. We have a few that, have a handful of customers. We want to get them to scale that. But we try to find mentors that will meet the company where they are and sort of work with them to get to the next stage. And then we have the same startup perks that a lot of other accelerators have, right? The, AWS credits, Azure, et cetera. So HubSpot.
No, that's great. And for those the early stage founders, is your goal? Can you talk about what do you intend to, where do you intend to take the Virgin Islands? Do you think that companies can really start, grow, and stay there, or that you intend it to be a place where companies get to a stable place and then go off to larger cities? What's your thoughts on its role in the startup ecosystem?
Yeah, I'd love for all the companies to start, grow, and stay. Clearly, that from an economic development perspective, that helps the territory more than anything else. Again, we're still in the early stages, so still TBD. But I will say, from that first cohort, the companies have gone on to collectively raise a little over $800,000, and just in a short period of time, really increase collective revenue by over $150,000. So in terms of like graduating a company, getting them to raise money, getting them to increase their revenue, like we've checked that box. And so now it's figuring out, okay, as you grow and scale, what are the next set of hurdles that you're going to encounter, and how can we help you navigate those? But again, the idea is for them to stay. To me, a good problem to have is if the companies get so big that VCs start poaching them and telling them, hey, in order for you to get this $10 million check, I want you to be in our backyard. And we'll deal with that when we get there. Hopefully, we do get there. But for now, as you know, not every startup is going to go off to raise a Series A, Series B, Series C, and become this unicorn. But that doesn't mean that the startup wasn't successful, right? As you know, when we look at the portfolio, there hopefully will be some companies that have gone on to raise larger rounds of funding. But then there will be some companies that hopefully will raise some money, get them to a point where they're not going to be a hyper growth type of company, but do well enough for the founders to do really well, and create some generational wealth for them, but then also be able to hire more and more people here in the territory. And that's really one of the big goals, is job creation in sort of the higher paying technical roles, right? And then from there, you understand how the ecosystem works, where if one person out of cohort one goes on to raise $1 million and their company employs 25 to 30 people 2 years from now, and hopefully some of those people are UVI graduates and they work for that company for a couple of years, and then they go on to start their company, and hopefully that cycle just continues. And from there is when you'll see a real change in the local economy. And going back to just the pure population numbers, if we can have, let's just say 2 or 3 companies out of every cohort continue to survive and thrive and employ 5 to 10 people, that doesn't make a dent in most places, but it does here, right? If we can go from 2019 not having any of these companies because there was no accelerator program, so none of these companies exist, and they're not creating jobs, to let's fast forward to 2025, and we have 10 tech companies in the territory that all employ 5 people, then we've significantly changed the local economy, right? And that's one of the big goals with what we're trying to do here.
Okay, no, that's great. And what would you say? I position it this way: the unique competitive advantage of the Virgin Islands is, and I'll preface it a little bit, is as you know, there's another accelerator that I went through, Parallel 18 in Puerto Rico, right? Also in the Caribbean, and we used to talk about Puerto Rico, that there's a depth of design talent, and then also pharmaceutical industries used to be there, and that was some of the unique knowledge that was there that could be the seeds of companies, right? It could influence the type of companies built there. For the Virgin Islands, what would you do you have any hypothesis on what that may be for? Are you seeing patterns in certain companies that are starting there?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things. First, Puerto Rico, millions of people.
Yes,
versus,
yeah. Versus 100,000. Yeah, 2 million versus. So, I get it. I get that. Yeah.
Yeah. But so there's a few advantages to being in the U.S. Virgin Islands. We have the same sort of tax incentive package that they have in Puerto Rico. And at the earlier stages of a company, it doesn't make a lot of sense because you're not necessarily generating any income, or at least not any net income, where tax incentives really helps a lot. But we do have that package, and it does attract a number of people. Another very interesting little known fact about the U.S. Virgin Islands is on the island of St. Croix, which is where I am right now, the underwater cables that connect the broadband, all internet that goes from South America into North America. There's a small building on the northwest corner of St. Croix where those cables come into and connect, and then now feed into the United States. So if anybody wants to Google that, that's just the underwater sea cables for tier 1 connectivity. So actually the territory has some of the fastest internet that you can get. And now that plays a part, as you know, with high frequency trading, yep. Things like that in the fintech space. So we actually have a company or two in this current cohort that are really focused on that and building some special products, if you ask me, that relate to that. But that's just kind of winning the geographic lottery, right? Yep. But if you think about it, the Caribbean or the U.S. Virgin Islands historically has been a place for trade, right? There's always been ships that have come into the territory, done some trades, and this was a stop on their way to the United States. So it's no different. It's just now it's happening with tier 1 infrastructure versus goods being traded. So that's a very big advantage. And as you know now, really all you need is fast internet, right, in order to be able to work from home or work from anywhere. So that's a big pull. The other part is, and different from Puerto Rico, is while large percentage of the population in Puerto Rico do speak English, the entire U.S. Virgin Islands, like, English is the primary language. So there's no real language barrier at all if you're either moving here or if you're already here. So that's a big advantage that I think we haven't really taken big advantage of, if you ask me. But those are just some of the examples of it. We also have a great university, which is what the Research and Technology Park is affiliated with. We have access to the president of the university, dean of different schools within the university, and we work with them closely to make sure that we're working on or teaching things that not only the startups would need, but also these traditional RT Park companies that have come into the territory. So we're small enough that we have the flexibility to design different programs and certificates, et cetera, so that people are learning exactly what is needed by the companies that we're trying to help spur here in the territory.
Great. No, thanks for sharing that. That's appreciate that insight on the Virgin Islands. If you can share a bit about, we understand tourism has decreased, but focusing more on the positives of what's come out of COVID. What are startups doing to innovate and thrive, and what are you all doing in light of this challenging time?
Yeah. So, and as you probably imagine, there's always going to be a handful of startups that we have in our program that are tourism related, right? So in the last cohort, we had one. This cohort, we have one that's related to carnivals. And because of COVID, there were no carnivals. There was the Cruise and Christmas Festival, which happened before all of this, but there's been 2 carnivals that couldn't take place on the other 2 islands because of COVID. So definitely have to be creative and flexible, just overall, with some of the companies that have come through the program. An example of that is in our first cohort, we had a company that was really focused on tourism. being able to capitalize on tourists that were coming to visit the territory. And there was a bill that's being worked on that is a marijuana legislation, right? So originally going to be for medical use, but then thinking about opening up even broader than that. And so the startup, to me, is a great idea. They were building sort of an API to allow Caribbean governments, all Caribbean governments, doesn't have to be the U.S. Virgin Islands, to be able to capitalize on tourism. So tourists that were coming over, whether they're flying in or coming over on cruise ships, to be able to interact with a physician through telemedicine, telehealth, be diagnosed, and then be able to participate in what if it's medical marijuana in whatever island they're visiting within the Caribbean. Obviously, no cruise ships or planes were coming in, so they needed to pivot. And their real pivot is just coming up with solutions to help Caribbean governments, which some of them aren't as technically as advanced as some of the municipalities in the states. So one of the pivots is really a telehealth solution and contact tracing. So being able to see patients through video conferencing, try to diagnose them, be able to chat with them through the app, but also being able to turn on contact tracing if necessary, so that you could see, if you were in a space and interacted or came in close contact with someone who's been diagnosed with COVID-19. So that's just really one example. We've had another that was an event promotion, but they were dealing with live events, concerts, etc. And doing really well until COVID-19, and but have quickly figured out a way to turn most of their events into live events, virtual events, and so be able to sell tickets for that, which I think a lot of event promoters and event spaces are trying to do that. So being able to quickly turn that on, and they're launching within the next 30 days their sort of virtual live event promotions and ticketing system. So yeah, like anywhere else, we're seeing resiliency in the founders. We're seeing them be able to, turn something that, most people would just give up and shut down into being flexible, pivoting into something that the world needs right now. And so I'm really proud of them for that, and happy to be with them for that journey.
Yeah, I got into a conversation with another founder. She's based in Brazil when this all started, and and I was like, how's the impact of COVID? She's like, we do this stuff every day. She's like, we worry about funding for tomorrow and we're changing the business. And she's like, it's challenging, but it's not, she's like, this is what we do. So, you see that resiliency in founders. It's nice. It's invigorating to see. And together we are, able to do that. It's tough, not easy for sure. But the community you're building helps founders persist in that. So looking forward, what do you see unveiling for what's next for Accelerate VI? What's coming in the next 12 to 18 months for you all?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we're in the middle of our second cohort. Again, we had to do it virtually, but the feedback we've received has been really good. Luckily, everyone, has been able to participate. I think sometimes we forget that because a person may not be directly affected by this pandemic, it doesn't mean that they have other things going on in their life that could pull them away. So we've been very lucky to keep all of the companies for this virtual cohort. We're going to do a virtual demo day, which I've been paying attention to other accelerators and see how they've done it. One of the models that I like the best is really having the founders sort of do their own recording, right? Whether we do a Zoom meeting and they record their pitch, they go through their pitch deck, et cetera, and then you provide that to people in some way so that they can soak it in, digest it on their own time, versus trying to make sure everyone can meet, July 7th at 7 p.m. your one chance to see all of the companies.
Yeah.
So I think in order to give our founders a better reach, I think being able to record it, sending it out to our distribution list and make sure people get to see their pitches, I think will be a good thing. Luckily, from what I've seen, there's still a lot of activity in terms of people looking for good deals, investors looking for good deals. So I'm not too worried about that. I think if you have something that's compelling and it fits with what the investor is looking for, then it's going to spark some conversations. So be on the lookout for that, Sergio. I'll make sure that I'll share it with you once we do our demo day. That will be in early July. And then from there, we'll just kind of assess, how this cohort went. Obviously, I love the face-to-face, the in-person accelerator. I think, honestly, you get a little bit more out of it that way. But this is the way life is right now. This is the new normal. So we'll see what happens after this. We'll see how long before we get opened back up and people feel more comfortable with doing it in person. And from there, we'll figure out if we're going to have another virtual cohort this year, or if we wait until early 2021 and do something that's in person. But either way, we'll open up applications in the fall for the next cohort. And again, we're really focused on finding local entrepreneurs, but each cohort we find at least 2 companies that are not in the territory, but are willing to either relocate sort of immediately or relocate over time in order to participate in the programs. So again, demo day, early July. In the fall, we'll open up applications for the next cohort. Both of those I will share with you, and we can both do a social media blitz. But I'm just really excited about really what we've done in the first cohort, what we're doing with this second cohort, and I want to be able to get the word out there, especially as we're dealing with majority underrepresented founders. And so we want to make sure that we shine a light on that, and that we provide funding opportunities for these for these founders. We're finding the right investors that want to work with us. And hopefully, based off of the results of the first 2 cohorts, we can go out and raise some money of our own and be able to do an even larger program, right? So.
That's great. That's great. And no, I appreciate that. We're gonna pause there. So thank you, Eric. Eric Sonnier, the director of Accelerate VI at RT Park in the University of Virgin Islands. Thank you for joining us today. For all those watching, this is Rebel One Live. We have investors and innovators accelerating impact every week at 7 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesdays through Thursdays. So thanks for joining us, and thank you, Eric, for your time.
Thank you.
Awesome. So cool. I've paused.